I don't remember exactly, but it was something like, well, where does the oneness come from? Or
something like that.
Something like that. But I think we all know the idea. I'm going to read to you, this is a quote from Albert Einstein, the physicist. A human being is a part of a whole called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty.
Wow. He's a physicist, right?
And he is a physicist.
He's quite wise.
He is a wise physicist. The unity that we're talking about, this isn't something mysterious and difficult to discover. It's something that is hidden from us by our ignorance, by our delusion in a very simple form. The delusion of separateness hides it, but it doesn't always hide it. It only hides it when that delusion of separateness is manifesting. And it's the mental afflictions that we have, the desire and aversion based in craving, cause us to deliberately disregard this obvious unity and sameness. So it's not like it's difficult for us to figure out that it's there. It's that we have to get over the afflictions that make us turn away from it and deny it, even though it's obvious. And the ignorance of separateness, which tends to sometimes stand between us and seeing this. And so that's, I think, the way for us to approach this. We're not trying to discover some mysterious secret, something that's only temporarily hidden from us, but is otherwise obvious. When I found this quote, I also found another one on the opposite page that jumped out at me because it's related to this. So I'm going to read it and then I'll carry on with the discussion. But I thought that this was something it's interesting for you to know. I don't know. I don't know what kind of background in science any of you have. So whether you're aware of how many different atoms there are in a human body, but it is a number with so many zeros after it that it is boggling to your mind. So the body, your body, has so many particles to it that if they were spread all over the planet, we find them everywhere. And this is what this is about. We are all made of stardust. As brothers of the wild beasts and cousins of the flowers in the fields, we all carry the history of the cosmos. Just by breathing, we are linked to all other beings that have lived on the planet. All other beings that have ever lived on the planet. For example, still today, we are breathing in, this is each of us, millions of atomic nuclei from the fire that burned Joan of Arc in 1431. And some of the molecules from Julius Caesar's dying breath. Every day, one of us. That's how interconnected we are. When a living organism dies and decays, its atoms are released back into the environment and eventually become integrated into other organisms. Our bodies contain about 1 billion atoms, that once belonged to the tree under which the Buddha attained enlightenment. So, yes. So, this appearance, all of the different appearances of multiplicity come down one way or another to the basic illusion of duality. And so we really need to only overcome a duality. We don't need to solve the problem of how we are one with the 6 billion people who live on the planet now, and I don't know what the number would be of other organisms now, or the number of organisms that have ever lived or might live. But we don't need to do that. We just need to be able to overcome a duality. The duality between mind and matter, the duality between consciousness and the object of consciousness, the duality between self and other. That's the duality that we need to overcome. It is the illusion of separateness that supports this perceived duality of self and other. And you asked how this relates to emptiness. And I think we've already seen, I hope so, and if not, or maybe anyway, we can go into this further, but this multiplicity are appearances, and we have discussed several good evidences, solid evidences for the fact that these appearances are empty of being the way they appear to us to be, right? Do we need to say anything further about the things are emptiness? Emptiness means that everything that we experience is empty of having a nature of being the way it appears to us, but rather that appearance is a projection of our mind, or that appearance is something that arises in our mind. Are we all okay with that idea and understand it from previous discussions? Okay. And this is not to deny the existence of anything outside of ourselves. That would be a mistake to say that, well, everything is empty, that means nothing exists except my mind in which these appearances arise. And that would be a rather time-consuming topic to go into. But and so really I don't think it's particularly appropriate or necessary, but I just want to make sure that that's clear, that to say something is empty. Well, to say that something is empty, to say that everything is empty, means that there is a problem with our notion of how things exist. And so if we cling to the notion that we normally have of how things exist, in that sense, when we say that everything is empty, we'd have to say that everything doesn't exist. But when we say that it's empty, we're not really denying its existence. We're denying its self-existence as what appears to us. Okay? Because otherwise we would be reducing everything to a kind of nothingness. And emptiness is not nothingness. But emptiness is what underlies the appearances that we see. And so the duality that we need to overcome is overcome through the unification of appearances and emptiness. Yeah.
So how do you answer when a Buddhist or people has a Buddhist background or a person don't has a Buddhist background ask you that we are going to everybody is going to die and everything is changing, so life is meaningless.
Yeah.
How do you answer that?
Good question. That's how do you answer that question, and how do you keep from slipping into that feeling? Because you see, that is a feeling that when people have a powerful insight into impermanence and they realize that everything is changing, and when they have an insight into that they don't have a permanent self-nature, that there isn't some substantial being that is going to be reincarnated or go to heaven or something like this. And when they recognize that all of the things that they have previously attached meaning to, that they had attached to in one way or another to give their life meaning, are in fact empties and projections of their mind. The experience they have can be a terrible state of despair, of loss. But the only reason that they experience that is that they are still attached to the idea of self. And they're still experiencing this from the point of view of self. It's a very difficult thing to explain to somebody who has no background, who doesn't have all the different components of the understanding. So where do you find a starting point to explain it to them? Because what it sounds like is that it's the worst case of materialism, and that we're just this temporary being, and that you're going to die, and that's it. Added to which, even all the stuff out there is only a projection of the mind, and it has no meaning either. So
then people would think, I just pursue what I want.
The people who what?
Pursuing what I want. Just chasing what I want, what I desire, and satisfy myself.
Mm-hmm.
And find pressure.
That's right. People who take that attitude, that is one of the conclusions they come to, is that, I might as well do anything I want. I might as well, have as much pleasure as I can. Even more than that, this idea is so horrible, I need to make myself so busy with distractions that I don't need to face this. It's called, in that sense, the existential challenge of the meaninglessness, which people seek to overcome through distraction. But, so, how do you suggest that encounter that?
Well, I'm from mainland China, so a lot of people has this kind of view, because a lot of people don't has a spiritual belief. So
right.
This is a big problem in my society I'm from. But oftentimes I will ask this question not by them, but by Buddhists. By Buddhists.
By which?
By Buddhists.
By
Buddhists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
You're often asked this question by Buddhists.
Yeah.
You're a Buddhist?
Yeah. But because of a lot of them, if they don't have a religious belief, they will not ask this kind of question. Mm-hmm. So they already take a view of their life. but some Buddhists or some people just get into Buddhism, so they have this kind of idea to say, "Wow, that's horrible," and what's the meaning of life? Everything is empty.
But, well, it's a difficult and challenging thing, and understanding the emptiness of everything doesn't really help, because people who understand the emptiness, but they haven't really grasped it, the truth at the deepest level, and haven't let go of the attachment to their sense of self, may become extremely, you say, narcissistic. They feel everything then begins to revolve around them, and everything's empty, so nothing matters. And this also can put them in a position of being very manipulative of others, because to the degree that they understand the way that things are empty and that our minds project, they may quite willingly manipulate the projections of others to satisfy themselves. And they might actually do this from a place of presenting themselves as a spiritual teacher, because you can come to that level of understanding without having come to the point that produces the liberating transformation and the moral basis, the basis for compassion. So what you're talking about is it's a serious problem. Somebody coming to Buddhism, most of the people in the world who claim to be Buddhists have a very superficial understanding. They grasp onto the idea of rebirth as reincarnation, and of making merit, and of making good karma, and it fulfills their needs. But when they move out of that to the level of understanding the deeper meaning of Buddhism, it can become very difficult and very disillusioned. That's why the practice side is absolutely so essential. You really have to have insight and understanding that comes experientially through practice. And even somebody who takes up the study of Buddhism scholastically may come to a conclusion that it's quite pessimistic and negative and nihilistic, and come to the conclusion that the Buddhist teaching is nihilistic, is pessimistic. Life is suffering. Well, that's true. Life is suffering, and there is no self, and so it can become very unsatisfying. The only thing that can save anyone in this is to actually gain understanding through experience, and that's what will make a difference. But there's a lot of things that we talk about, a lot of understanding that we have, and fortunately we already start out, most of us, with those ingredients in our mind stream that will support us through the process of getting beyond these problems and coming to this understanding at a level of meaning. I mean, you must have done something yourself to confront these problems.
Just as you said, your existence is being example practice of before we save the world, we save us first, save ourselves first.
Save yourself first. Yeah. In this case, it's necessary. Might not always be the most noble thing to do if the house is on fire, but in this case, you got to save yourself.
And oftentimes, I think it's quite easy for people to understand that, say, the house is temporary, it's changing, the car is changing, so people, it's more difficult to find there's no self.
Yeah.
Still, if I have some, I'm not changing.
Yeah. Well, that's right. You still have, even as your understanding of selflessness grows, you're not devoid of a sense of self. You still feel like you have one, right? And that's both good and bad. That's good up to a point, but then when you become too completely confronted with impermanence and the truth of suffering, then that will be, at that point, that sense of self is going to be a problem once again, because the mind-created sense of self, your mind is going to process this information and say, wow, are we ever in trouble? And it's going to produce the feelings that go along with being in a lot of trouble. So we've got to, first of all, what you'd have to, I think, explain to somebody, what you have to understand for yourself is, and come to believe that your mind is creating all of this. You have to understand that at some point you have to recognize this before you can really go much further. And you have to accept that your experience of suffering is something that's created by your mind. And your mind only creates experience of suffering because your mind believes in the sense of self that it creates. And you are not your mind. You, as the experiencer, though, your whole objective in your life has always been to be free from suffering and to be happy. And what the path promises is that you will be forever free from suffering and be happier than you've ever been before. So at this point, before you've actually attained any kind of understanding, there has to be a certain element of faith present. And that faith has to be sufficient to motivate you to practice. But then as you practice, you begin to have very tangible experiences that support your faith. And that support the basis for it. You have experiences of being happy in a way that is not dependent upon external circumstances. You have experiences of realizing that you don't have to suffer for exactly those reasons that you have been used to suffering. And you find that you are able to let go of suffering. You find you experience less agitation and distress and peace of mind, because the practice does bear fruit all the way along from the very beginning. And it's the fact that it does that sustains your faith that the end of the path isn't going to be some hopeless nihilism, but rather, in fact, a complete transcending of suffering. What the Buddha said is ehipatiko, come and see. He said, come and see. And this is really what anyone has to do. They have to come and see for themselves. There's a limit to we can talk a lot, we can inspire We can inspire. We can explain. We can point out a lot of obvious truths that lead somebody, but ultimately they have to try it for themselves. They have to do it for themselves, and they have to satisfy themselves. And until they do it, there's a limit to how far they'll come, which is why, you might ask, I ask this question myself. So, why in most of the Buddhist countries of the world does the Sangha allow most Buddhists to believe things that are just simply not true according to Buddhism? Have you ever asked yourself that? What's that?
I have wondered that, yeah.
Yeah. Have you wondered that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems to me the Buddhist country, I'm not trying to degrade them, they really have difficult in social structure, by exploitations.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a different question, but the question that I've asked is, temples holding ceremonies for people to do offerings for dead ancestors. Now these things, all of these practices actually are good and beneficial in their own way. Making of merit, the things, the system of thinking that underlies the making of merit causes people to perform good actions. And the belief in karma, even if it is projected onto a reincarnation in a next life and a next life and a next life, it leads people to a more moral and ethical kind of behavior. So good comes of it. And that's the reason why it is the way it is. Buddhism really, it is such a sophisticated institution that it has these different levels, and anyone who wants to is always free to go to a deeper level of understanding. But while people are as yet at the level that they're as yet unable to grasp and understand, and would in fact be quite disturbed if they understood the deeper significance of these things. They're allowed and encouraged to view things in what we might say a slightly distorted way. Or you might look at it as a grossly distorted way, but that's a distorted way. Yes?
I think in terms of the karma thing, rebirth, I think when Buddhism developed, originally Buddha, he directly interacted with his disciple after he died, and I think Buddhism evolved, slowly becomes a religion. And once you have to deal with the mass, and I think this karma becomes only moral constraint to the mass, that to do good or behave in certain way.
Yeah.
And I think even in America, I remember, I think Venerable Bodhi, he translated all the Pali texts, and he's a very respectable Buddhist scholar. As a matter of fact, he took a very strong stand that karma, that he thinks karma is the one provides social constraint in terms of, because I think Buddhism actually is very sophisticated. There are two levels. One is the absolute level, as we discussed here. But then at the other level is the relative level. And we all live in a relative world.
Yes.
And all our value system and culture, political, social, are all relative. So at the relative level, you need something.
That's right.
To deal with the mass, because not everybody can understand the absolute level. And I think in this world, I would think 5% of the population would be pretty lucky.
That's right.
95% people really living a very unaware life. You know, actually, Sina Han said once, when this guy's riding on a horse, and he said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Well, the horse will lead where I am." And then most of the people are.
That's right. Yes.
And so when it becomes an organized religion, then you need something for a moral constraint.
Mm-hmm. But there is a level of, I mean, this at the relative level, there is tremendous value, and it's not false in the sense that it leads in the right direction. Somebody who practices virtue, even if the motivation is somewhat distorted, as I said, they actually are making changes in themselves which are leading in the right direction, and if at any point that they wish to go to a deeper level of understanding and practice, they can. And that's what does happen all of the time. But the question you're asking, though, is we have this problem of people that are on the boundary between the two Buddhisms. The popular Buddhism, which provides a lot of simplistic ideas and a certain amount of comfort, and the more sophisticated level of Buddhism, which actually turns some of those things that we hold on to most tightly on their head. And to directly confront the issue of selflessness, non-self. This is a big step, to be able to do this, to be with a group of people I can do this with. You know, in a more public teaching, you'd probably teach a lot of the other stuff that I've talked about, but not really get into that to such a great depth, because that would bring people to this point of confrontation with what they're clinging to that they might not be ready to come to yet. But it is also, it's impossible to bring somebody quickly to the point of actual awakening, of actual letting go of the attachment and illusion of self and understanding the deeper truth without these things coming up. And so this area of difficulty always has to be bridged in one way or another. It's always encountered. And somebody, as you're aware, when somebody undertakes an insight practice, it's going to lead them to direct experience of truths which, to whatever degree they're still attached to the sense of self and the reality of the things that are projected by their mind, it's going to lead to distress. And intellectually are going to be raised the questions, and somebody's trying to understand the Dharma, and so they think about this and go deeper and deeper, and they come to this kind of question of, or this kind of, it's not a question, they come to this kind of feeling, this interpretation, this doubt and this uncertainty that where they really want to go, where this is taking them. This is a bit of a scary place to go. It takes away all the security that we're used to. But if it's combined with practice, it does so in a wonderfully gentle way, because it provides so many benefits. You gradually, there is one simile where the Buddha spoke, and he said that entering into this Dharma is like entering into the ocean. It goes gradually deeper and deeper rather than suddenly dropping you off. But at some point, there is no ground between your feet or beneath your feet, no matter what. There is a point that in entering into the ocean that you have to pass that The oneness of things, we sense that and we know that, and it's obvious. And this is, I feel, one of the things that if we entertain an understanding of that, at the same time, we are coaxing ourselves to give up our attachment to self, then it allows for this transition to go much easier. When you give up yourself, you gain the universe, and that really is true. When people, just to illustrate that, there's two different kinds of mystical experiences that I find that people often have, and they're not an experience of enlightenment, but they're an experience that brings them very close to enlightenment because it brings them to some of these profound truths that they need to understand. One of them is where they clearly perceive the emptiness of phenomenon directly and experientially, and but they still have this sense of an I. There is still the duality, and this is what must be overcome, is this duality. But I call this the dualistic mystical experience because it's obviously dualistic. The person clearly sees the impermanence, the emptiness of things arising and passing away. And they have the standpoint of being the aloof, objective witness, the uninvolved witness, as they observe the rising and passing away of phenomena. And they see the transparency of phenomena, the way that these things are causally related, and of course all the needless suffering and concern and worry and the artificial importance that we attach to things becomes very obvious. And this is very liberating for a person because it helps to separate them from a lot of the worry and concern and pain and that attachment to things and to situations and external phenomenon has. When you see them as empty, then you don't have so much clinging and attachment, and it makes it much easier. It's very wonderful. But there is still this strong sense of self, so they haven't really quite reached the final goal. And what it is, it's a wonderful experience. It gives them a lot of insight, and the more often they can repeat it, the better. The other kind of mystical experience is what we call the unified mystical experience. And this is another very wonderful thing that people have. It's where they temporarily lose all sense of self. And they feel at one with everything. They look at a flower, and there's no sense of separation from it. I am the flower. My consciousness and this flower are one and the same, in the sky and the trees. And it is such an incredibly wonderful, exhilarating discovery. And it affects you so deeply and fills you with so much joy and love and compassion and just being at one with everything. Because you've allowed the boundary that defines you to dissolve. And that is a wonderful experience to have and a wonderful experience to repeat, because it helps you to get used to the idea that not having self is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all. And it makes it much easier. But it too is not, it's not the final answer. You haven't really, because just as in the first case, you saw the emptiness of things, but you still experienced it from a perspective, a dualistic perspective of a self-existent, separate consciousness that is observing the emptiness of all things. In the other one, you are not really understanding the emptiness of things, the apparent reality of everything else is still there, but you have lost your separation boundary with it. And what you're after is the experience where both of these are true, where there is no boundary separating you from anything else. And the emptiness, both of the appearance of self and the appearances that make up everything else, is clear. That is the truly liberating experience. Or I should say, the truly liberated experience. The liberating experience itself is basically when the mind stops fabricating this whole mess. The mind stops creating all these appearances. The mind stops creating self. When the mind just stops, even for a moment, stops its creating, stops its fabricating, what happens is the true nature of things is experienced in a way that changes the mind, and thereafter it functions differently. There was an experience where the fabrications of mind had ceased, and once they've ceased, then their nature as fabrications has been seen. Doesn't mean it's fully understood, but it's seen, and this is what produces the change. It can happen in a lot of different ways. Some people, they can't even tell you what happened. It's just like it's a gap. It's like a blank space in their memory. And other people, it happens in subtle ways. Some people, it happens as a glorious experience of just pure consciousness. The consciousness that is there when there is no self and there's no object of consciousness. There is just that clear, luminous, clear light of mind present, and they remember it and know that. So, and it can happen in probably an infinite number of different ways, because actually most of how it happens is what your mind fabricates about the event after it's happened. If you see what I mean? Your mind stops creating reality, and so its true nature, which is emptiness and non-dual, is evident, and in some form or another registers on the mind. And then the mind gets going again, and the first thing it has to do is try to interpret the experience you just had. And some people, if a person believed in a God of some kind, then they might describe that they say, well, I just became one with the Godhead. My soul disappeared. I surrendered my soul and became one with the Godhead, and that's all there was. And it was so wonderful. And that person is transformed. They've awakened. But the words they put it in can be very misleading to other people. Ah, God, okay. So now they're working with concepts. And that's why you can't rely on the descriptions, but you also can't say that somebody that said, I had a mystical experience, I became one with God, and you say, well, you're not enlightened then, because Buddha said that there isn't a God, and blah, blah, blah. Because that would be mistaking too, that would be misunderstanding. That emptiness means the mind fabricates in order to make sense to itself of what it has experienced. Or somebody might be a Hindu or a practitioner of Vedic religion and say, Atman, the true nature of the Atman, which is Brahman, was realized. And doesn't matter what words they put it into. What matters is that it's an experience of things as they really are, which made a change in the way the mind works from that point. and they are liberated as a result of it. Their mind, they don't even need to know it happened. That's not important. You don't. A lot of people think to become enlightened, to become awakened, is to have some incredible event happen to you, and that somehow that's the essence of it. But it's not. A lot of times an incredible event does happen to you. You have an incredible experience that lasts for a second or lasts for 15 minutes or whatever it is. The essence of it is that there was an experience of the true nature of reality which caused the mind to work differently in the future. So that amongst the things that the mind knows is that this self that it fabricates is just a fabrication, because there has been this experience when it was not fabricated. And to some degree the mind understands that everything else is also its own fabrication. And so this alters the way the mind works from then on. There is, now in terms of this oneness, the sameness, we look at other people and we can see ourselves in them. And we see the suffering of someone else and we know they're suffering. There's not a mystery there. It's not something impenetrable. While it's true that we ordinarily can't go outside of our own mind space and enter into the mind space of another, there is no question from our experience that we are the same. We deny that in many ways all the time. But it isn't because we haven't known it. It isn't because it isn't evident. Because it is. Right? Like right now, look at anybody in this room and you may not know the appearances that their mind is generating. You may not know their inner landscape, but we are all the same. At the level of this consciousness, we're all the same, right? And suffering is suffering. And joy is joy. Yeah.
I just would like to distinguish a little more when you say that the unification of the feeling, like you mentioned, I see the flower look like it's between that, and then you say the mind really stop and really sees those separation. Okay, what's seems like there's a gap. And I fully understand this unification, the temporary. But
right.
what's the link from that to the finally mind sees?
The link between what I call the unified mystical experience and the experience of awakening.
Yeah.
The relationship is that in that unified mystical experience, your mind has stopped generating the boundary of self and the distinction of self. But it still is manufacturing a world of appearances. It is still making a world of appearances. Right? Okay. So the connection between them is that it's only partway there. The mind hasn't really stopped. It's just stopped doing one of the things it does. Okay?
Okay. Then what part is still not stopped?
The mind making everything else.
Oh.
See, the mind has to stop. It has to stop fabricating every part of reality. But that seems to be the way it happens.
What does that mean?
When the mind stops, the world stops. And when the world stops, you see what's left.
Then you won't be able to see or feel
That's right.
anything.
There's nobody there to see or feel.
I still need help. I still need help for this part. I fully understand for the unification that part, but still I just want to see what's the other parts.
The important part to understand is that even in the unification, the mind is still making all these appearances, and the mind is still believing in those appearances as being substantially real.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I get something. Okay, so until the mind really go beyond the appearance, right? Just say, because the appearance still see, oh, this is a flower. Even though I'm look like part of that, but still I'm thinking that a flower.
That's right.
So you say take out that, just take out that's a flower.
Right.
Just no any category or something in between. Is that what you mean?
Well,
Sorry.
you have a thought?
You have to see that it is still a product of the mind. Your mind see it, identify it. If you look at something, it's really all you see is color. Our eyes is a light-sensitive organ. All we see is really just light of different color. But then the mind makes distinguish this color of this shape as this object, and this color of this shape as that object, and we can judge distance based on this judgment of the shape and color and clarity. And it's all the product of the mind. And I think what the teacher is saying that we have to understand, the world that we understand is a product of a fabrication of our interpretation of what this world is based on our senses, based on our thinking.
Yeah. That is correct. But the thing that we really have to get to is it goes beyond this I and mind. There is, your words and your thinking, there's still an I see, I understand, I know. There's no I. In this experience, there is nothing. There is no flower, there is no color, there is no nothing, there is no duality, there is no separation of knower and known. There's not a knower and a nothingness, because emptiness is not the same thing as nothingness. You can have a knower and a nothingness, but and that's something that you can deliberately experience. It's one of the higher jhanas, and it's called the jhana of the base of nothingness. And there is a knower and nothingness, but it is not the experience of emptiness. It is not until your mind stops completely that you have the direct experience of emptiness, the total experience, empty. And what is emptiness? What does emptiness look like? It has no appearance. And if the experience is empty of self, there's no one experiencing it. Okay? So, the mind is this thing. It stops, and the world it creates stops. And then it starts up again. The wonderful thing that happens is that somehow or another, and I'm not even sure how this happens, somehow that experience registers, when the mind stopped, the experience of the emptiness changes the way the mind works from that on.
Yeah. So, from the unification, that's kind of feeding to that part. I kind of sense that. But is any practice we can do in order to cross that, or just keeping observing until suddenly, that will appear?
Well, yes, keep observing, and what there needs to be is very clear understanding into the 3 marks, because the 3 marks, when they're not understood, will keep the mind from stopping. The mind will keep on going. It's like a monkey swinging through the trees, and when this hand lets go, this hand grabs, and when this hand lets go, this hand grabs. And as long as you keep grabbing, then it won't stop. So as long as you're not totally convinced of the impermanence and the emptiness and the unsatisfactoriness of mental and physical objects, your mind is going to keep grasping onto mental and physical objects. It's going to keep generating and grasping, and it's going to keep going. When the other thing that you have to have is equanimity. You have to have whatever is occurring, whether it's pleasant or painful, that you have to have no reactivity to it. Because if it's pleasant and you react to it, you're going to grasp onto it through desire. And if it's unpleasant and you react to it, you're going to grasp onto it through aversion. And you're going to immediately, your mind is going to create a new reality that it hopes is going to be different. So there has to be equanimity. And so the experience you have is you keep looking and understanding, and it becomes clearer and clearer that yes, everything is impermanent. There are no things. There is nothing that's substantial. Everything is empty. This sense I have of myself, even though it feels real, it's empty. And it has to become really clear that if I cling to something that's impermanent and empty, it's like grabbing a red hot iron. It's going to burn me. Right? That to cling to things that are impermanent and empty only is going to cause suffering. They are unsatisfactory by nature. And then what's going to happen is that monkey of your mind is going to let go of a branch, and it's going to get ready to grab the next one, and then it's going to say, wait a minute. I know what this is about. This is impermanent and empty and suffering, and it's not going to grab. If it doesn't grab, then for at least a short time you're in the free fall between moments of creation. And now,
you fall on the ground.
the wonderful thing about it is that you don't crash to the jungle floor and that's the end of everything, but rather you come back to swinging through the trees, but it's a whole lot more fun.
So let me see that if I understand correctly. So the gap, in order to link that, once I have unified that feeling, link that is deeper, come back to look at the three characters, the impermanent, the emptiness, and dukkha. See that even deeper and in a subtle way, keeping practice that, then we'll get to that. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. The insights become so, and this, like I said, remember as I said before, enlightenment's an accident, and the practice just makes this accident prone. But the more completely and deeply that you can understand the truth of these three marks, then the more likely that you are to have this experience. And so you just keep doing that. You just keep doing it. You just keep reaffirming in every way that you can. Indeed, this is empty. Indeed, I am empty. Indeed, mind is empty. It's all empty. And keep reaffirming that these appearances are arising out of craving and desire, and they only create suffering. Okay? So, what you're working towards is the getting to the place where your mind no longer has, it has this momentum of craving and desire and wanting and wanting and wanting. And you have to exhaust that. And the other thing is that as long as there is a doer, as long as there is someone striving, then you haven't really recognized selflessness, and this doer is going to keep grasping. So there's an element of surrender, of letting go, of you keep refining that. Just let go, let go, let go. Just see what is, and let go of clinging. See what is, and let go of expectation. See what is, and let go of preconceived ideas. See what is, abandon views. And see what is, and surrender. Surrender, surrender. Practice surrender. Practice just accepting what is in whatever form comes up. This is what your mind is doing right now. Accept it. Surrender to it. Surrender to this. And in that way, the doer will stop doing, and the fabricator will stop fabricating, and the house builder will stop house building. At least for a moment. The house is still there, and you'll be back in it shortly, but but you can get to the point where the house builder quits entirely. Yeah? Did you both ask the question at the same time?
We are competing. Sometimes we wake up in the morning and we find ourselves, like this morning, I use like 1 minute to figure out, oh, I am here in America in this house. So, but I know I'm sleeping. So, what kind of a state of mind it is? We wake up and we don't know where.
Yeah. Well, it's a state of mind where it's actually called the Vanga, the stream of becoming. It's where there's consciousness, but the contents of consciousness are just all the old stuff that you carried along. And so coming out of that, and your mind sort of revs up and starts perceiving and taking objects, and so you can. That's what that disorientation is. Yes.
These experiences that you were talking about, do they all necessarily happen in meditation?
No, they don't.
All three of them can happen at any time? Is that
What's that? It all happens in an instant, but you can be happened to a woman as she was stepping onto a bus in Paris.
Which experience? The direct perception of emptiness?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Someone you know?
What's that?
Someone that you know?
No, this is someone who I read an account of their experience. And I've been looking into the variety of different experiences, and it's a topic of interest of mine. I'm talking to people. Now, other people, like I said, one person I know, his experience is, it was just a blank, a gap, but he really knew something had happened afterwards, but didn't remember anything. It was just like a gap in his consciousness. Mm-hmm. And I was very surprised at that. But it turns out that for people that practice in a particular way, that's commonly the kind of experience they have. So I think it's related to that. People that practice in another way commonly have the experience of some period of just pure consciousness, no self, no object, just pure naked consciousness, the clear light of the mind. So it is dependent on practice, and it's dependent on people's preconceived notions, and it's probably dependent on a whole lot of things that I haven't got a faintest clue about yet.
Ray, do you remember Ray, right?
Yeah.
Ray mentioned that his experience is he wake up during the middle of night and go to the restroom, and when he come back, suddenly everything's so clear.
Yeah.
Which you who?
Oh, it's one person.
It's not Richard. Okay.
You mean he was enlightened?
He understand teacher mentioned about that whole feeling, see the true nature and whole thing. And I just curious what his experience, and he described to me. He just routinely, he usually get up and go to restroom during the middle of the night, and he just routinely get up and go that and come back and lie down, and everything is so clear. According to him, just like the teacher said.
So he has enlightenment
I will get
experience.
up tonight.
Huh?
I will get up tonight. But there are many stories in Chinese Buddhist stories. The weekend experiences like that. Somebody drop a cup beside him, and you had it.
But I think the point is that, that's accident, just like you mentioned, and to just practice whatever we can do to practice, and not expect anything. And when the time is ripen, and it will happen.
That's right. That's exactly right. You create the conditions. And the conditions, that is the wonderful thing about Buddhism, is that a lot of attention has been paid to systematically being able to create the conditions. And the most important conditions are the ones that I mentioned, that you completely understand in the present moment the three characteristics. And, well, I'll tell you one kind of experience. Something arises. A mental object arises. And in the process of the mind perceiving, an object arises, and then there's a process of recognition, and it becomes real. But in the process of that arising, instead of what the person about to undergo this transformation experience they have, is they don't see the object as they normally would. They see it as, for example, impermanence. This is impermanence. This is what impermanence, this is impermanence. So they see it as impermanence itself. They see it as impermanence itself. And because that recognition of impermanence is accompanied by a recognition of suffering, and also a recognition of emptiness of self, then the mind turns away, rejects it. Instead of completing the process of grasping, it turns away and abandons, and that's how it happens. And when it happens that way, it's actually described in the scriptures as being that the awakening has been achieved, and the emergence is by means of it's called the signless emergence. And I have to explain that in the Buddhist technical material. The sign refers, or the word that we translate as sign, refers to the appearance of things as permanent. So when somebody sees something, and it doesn't mean lasting forever permanent, it means as being a substantial entity, seeing something as, being enduring, even if it's only for a moment, or having a mental object arise and seeing it as being enduring, having its own reality. That is the appearance, that's the sign. So signless means seeing it without the appearance, anamita, and it means seeing it as impermanent rather than as permanent. And so a person who has been doing a practice where they cultivate a very strong awareness of impermanence, then at the part of the practice, an object arises and they see it as impermanence rather than as an object. And then together with the other two characteristics being an understanding of them well developed, and the meditator being in a state of equanimity, the mind abandons the object and turns away from it. Might be experienced, the way that could be experienced is that the object, which is now only seen as impermanence, you don't see any other characteristics to it at all. Now, mental objects, when they arise, I don't know if you've noticed this, but they sort of fade and disintegrate. They become fuzzy and disappear. Sense objects, they sort of are cut off. There's a point that it's there and then it's cut off. But mental objects sort of just evaporate. So the mental object now is just this realization of impermanence. And their consciousness is riveted on this object perceived as impermanence as it goes away. And so the mind follows, the object came out of emptiness and it goes back into emptiness. And the consciousness is riveted to it and follows the object into emptiness. Rather than the mind, usually as an object fades, the monkey grabs the next branch, another object. But instead, the consciousness stays and follows the object into emptiness. And the person experiences it in whatever way they experience. That's one way that it comes about.
It doesn't sound like it, there's an experience of oneness. It's an identification of impermanence, an identification of not self, and identification of those things, not necessarily it means that this person feels this oneness that you're talking about.
Okay, the oneness, and no reason that they necessarily would. They're going to have an experience, and their mind might assemble it in different ways. Okay, and but they might have an experience of oneness if, and now that the emergence through signlessness could perhaps lead to the experience of pure consciousness, but that's I don't personally know that it could lead to that experience. Maybe it does. So that person might not have an experience of oneness. Someone who has an experience of what we're calling pure consciousness, the clear light mind, is having an experience of oneness, although they might not recognize it. Not until they've repeated this many times. And that's the thing. This is not a one-time occurrence. It needs to be repeated. But the first time it happens, it makes a permanent change in a person. But and someone like my friend who can't remember the experience, there is an awareness in his mind, or let's put it this way. As I told you before, we're already aware of oneness. But what happens is that the illusion of separateness comes up and blocks our seeing what's right in front of us. And desire and aversion make us deny oneness. We feel oneness with other people, but it makes it deny it. So the person who has this signless emergence and perhaps has a period of just a gap, and then afterwards, you'd say, if you ask them, say, well, did you have an experience of oneness? No, not me. And it really happens that someone like that would say, yeah, and enlightenment is not an experience of oneness because I didn't have an experience of oneness, but they just don't know. That's all. Okay, so they might not have it, but what you'll see in the way they behave is that they're no longer so obscured of recognizing the oneness. Both the oneness, their being a part of all things, is far more a part of the way they are now from then on. And also, you see, when somebody has an awakening experience, it affects them morally. It affects them in terms of virtue. It's because desire and aversion no longer have the same power as they did before to cause you to deny the oneness that you see in other people. And so a person naturally behaves with more virtue, because all of the principles of Buddhist virtue are principles of not harming others, not causing harm to others, and not causing harm to yourself. This person, as a result of their practice, knows that unvirtuous, unkind actions based in greed and aversion, are harmful to them because they've seen the effect it has on their own mind. And they see the effect that they have on others, and there is not the same sense of separateness with others. And so it changes their behavior. It doesn't matter that the person said, oh, I had an experience of oneness. They don't have to have an experience of oneness. But they have a manifestation of a greater understanding of oneness. As you proceed on the path, there are distinct sort of landmark stages along the path, and the oneness becomes more evident. But it's in becoming an arhat that the total experience of non-separateness is realized. But before a person becomes an arhat, they can, and hopefully will, have experiences of what I call the union of appearances and emptiness.
That's a question I want to ask. Would you elaborate more?
All right. Appearances. All appearances have the nature of emptiness, right? And so, in that sense, what they are appearances, they're illusions. We could call them appearances, we could call them illusions. Okay? But that doesn't mean that they're non-existent. Because they do, you experience them. You experience appearances. They're empty of the nature of being what they appear to be. But they are a reality in terms of your experience. And also, they have a nature of being dependent. They are dependent. Origination operates in their production. They arise out of desire and aversion and clinging. They arise out of perceptions that are determined by karmic formations. So they are dependent in their nature. But they don't have a substantial existence from their own side. So we look at them and we say they are empty. And then you understand the nature of the mind as emptiness. So you still have this duality. The empty nature of the mind in which these appearances arise. And the appearances are the dependent nature. So all that's left to completely dissolve this duality is the realization that the emptiness and the appearances are the same. That there is only one thing. Now, emptiness, the mind that's empty, the things that are empty, consciousness itself, that pure light of the mind, doesn't have qualities of beginning and ending and changing and being one place or another. It's outside of time, and it's outside of space. Which means that it's also not divisible into, there's not multiple emptinesses, there's not multiple clear-like minds. But another way, there's not multiple Buddha natures. What we're calling the Buddha nature is that emptiness. If emptiness was divisible in space and time, it wouldn't be empty, would it? So, logically, it has to be a kind of oneness. So we experience appearances and we know that we're empty, and we experience emptiness. If we bring those two together, we have the union of appearances and emptiness. And then we have erased the final duality.
Still need help.
Should we save it for another time? Because the teacher might be very tired.
Actually, we've gone quite a bit over time here. That's true.
We'll save it for tomorrow.
And most of these last things that we're talking about, they're not going to be useful to you at this stage. We're not really doing a good thing for ourselves by talking about this. We're telling fairy tales now.
We just need to practice. It comes down to it.
The union of emptiness and appearances is a nice fairy tale that will allow you to go peacefully to sleep and have good dreams. But you cannot grasp it conceptually. And so it won't make any difference to ask a whole lot of more questions and to try to answer those questions. Because whatever we say about it is not going to be... Yes.
Just to clarify the language, the word. So what you're saying is, samsara is nirvana, nirvana. Am I correct, or totally misunderstand?
No, that is one way that it is often put.
Yeah.
When you say that, of course, it's very confusing if somebody understands samsara in terms of suffering rather than in the true nature of samsara as being empty appearances. But that is in fact a very true way that you can put it, samsara.
So I didn't misunderstand you. I didn't misunderstand.
No, you did not misunderstand. Yeah.
And can a person go from an Arya to an Arhat in one lifetime?
Sure, why not? Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, they have
that's
terms, once returner and no returner, and
that's right. Well, but what they mean. First of all, the literal interpretation. We're going over time. I don't know, but we're having so much fun.
We're having fun.
At the expense of your image.
The literal interpretation of 7 times returner, 1 times returner, non-returner, and arhat is that a 7 times returner, they're a stream enterer. They've had the initial breakthrough. But it's possible that they may be reborn as many as 7 times before they become arhats. Okay? But it doesn't mean that they have to be. It could be 6 or 5 or 4 or 3 or 2 or 1, or it could happen half an hour later. Okay? Likewise, the once returner at the literal level could be reborn once more before they become an arhat. And the non-returner will not be reborn in the sense realm, but will be reborn in the deva realm, and will become an arhat there. So that's the literal meaning of these things. Now, of course, be reborn 7 times. Wait a minute. We're in a conflict here already. Another way of understanding this is metaphorically, that rebirth is taking place continuously, but that the idea of being reborn into samsara. So a person has this experience, and then they go out in the world, but they are not a perfected being yet. They have many ego habits, and they still have craving, they still have desire and aversion. So they can be captured again by samsara, never the way it was the first time, but they can be captured again. And 7 means this can happen. This could happen not a huge number of times, but it could happen quite a few times. That's what 7 means. Each time, the person gets caught up in old habitual patterns of behavior and they start to experience suffering and maybe they start to do some things that are unwholesome, but then it's like they wake up and they come back out of it. And this could happen a number of times before they go to the next stage. And then the person who is a once returner, this is a person who realizes that what they have to do, they have to completely uproot desire and aversion related to the sense realm. What they recognize is that mental states that we talked about earlier today, they meditate on mental states, and mental states are changing. And they realize that there is only one truly wholesome mental state, and all the rest are in one way or another unwholesome and dissatisfying. And the only unwholesome mental states that they experience are those when desire and aversion are absent. And so they have a profound, powerful wish to overcome craving and aversion, desire and aversion, and become free of unwholesome mental states. So they go back into samsara with the deliberate purpose of uprooting desire and aversion. And that's the once returner. They have to return in order to do that. The non-returner has destroyed desire and aversion. So even though they're still in the world, they're not going to experience the kind of suffering that comes from desire and aversion. So they are a non-returner to samsara, but they're not fully enlightened yet. They're not an arhat. See? That's the meaning of that. And a comparison that I can use, the 7 times returner was having this nightmare, in other words, ordinary life. And they woke up. Wow, I'm glad that that's not real. Huge relief. Feel a lot better. But they might stay awake or they might fall asleep again. If they fall asleep again, the nightmare might start up again, but not that long. They'll wake up. They'll wake up out of it a lot more quickly this time. And that could happen a number of times. The once returner, he's like a lucid dreamer because he's going into the dream, but this time with awareness. If you have a lucid dream, you can control what happens in the dream. You can choose how you're going to behave, whereas in a non-lucid dream, you react blindly as a result of your sankharas, your mental formations. So we can use the analogy of the sleeper, the dreamer, and the lucid dreamer to understand the relationships between these. But doesn't have to fall asleep again. Don't have to come back 7 times. It can happen right away.
So he does. Oh, sorry.
One more. So you explained it metaphorically.
Yeah.
7 is really a long time because if you think about what the Buddha said about being enlightened after 7 days of meditation, we all done more than 7 days by this point, and I don't know if any of us have achieved enlightenment yet. So. and then this is probably our Canton retreat or something like that.
Well, the Buddha meditated for 7 years.
So his 7 days is his days. I don't know if it's Deva days or human days.
Yeah, so, he meditated for 7 years. Then he gave up austerities, ate rice milk, sat down by the river. He sat down by the river and he said, I'm not going to get up until I become enlightened. And he became enlightened by the time the sun came up the next morning. And then he continued to sit for 7 days and enjoying the bliss of enlightenment. Now, let's not really clear. Was he an arhat from sunrise on, or was he a non-returner, sat there for 7 days and then became an arhat? It's not specifically laid out, and I think the traditional idea is an arhat from 6 a.m. when the sun came up. But
Buddha was very creative. How he created 4, not 5.
I created with the
4 stage, but not 5.
4 stages rather than 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, it is just like the 10 stages of the meditation practice. It's like there's a process that takes place, and there's some, if you decide to break it up, there's some obvious things that are consistent across many different people that you attach the label of stage to. And so he could have made 5 or 7 or 9 or whatever. As a matter of fact, in Mahayana, they make 10 bhumis, right?
15.
Or 15 or 12. They have
No,
different.
5 Bodhisattva stage.
Well, there's the 5 bodhisattva bhumis, and then there's the 5 paths.
Yeah.
Right. And which come from different traditions, and it's funny that they get glued together, and you see that they don't really fit.
No, actually, it's a huge argument between the Mahayana and whether Aha is a bodhisattva or not. They still argue about it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting argument. On one hand, saying, an arhat, which, by the way, means somebody who's completely transcended the sense of self. Arhat is selfish.
According to Mahayana.
Okay. And the whole rest of the dispute after that
That's right.
becomes very entertaining.
That's right.
It's obvious that the whole basis of the dispute is scholasticism, philosophical and theoretical.
But then I think the dispute because we are not enlightened, that's why we have to dispute, because it's still relative.
That's right.
Level.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I find that scholastics have a lot of disputes that meditators can see that they don't. That what they're talking about is pointless.
Yes.
So, but scholastics often, philosophers often don't meditate enough. So.
Or at all.
And so they dispute about how many Buddhas can dance on the head of a pin.
So does an enlightened person make mistake in life?
What's that?
Make any mistake in their life? Still make mistake like an enlightened person?
Would an enlightened person be...
Will make mistake in life, in their daily life?
Would they be... Did you say sick?
Mistake.
Mistake. Making mistakes.
Making mistakes.
Yeah.
Yes.
An interesting question. A very interesting question. Because one of the common things that's said about Buddhas and Arhats is that they are omniscient. This is both a part of popular Buddhism, and it's also a part of scholastic analysis, is to say that Buddhas are omniscient. And in popular Buddhism, that's taken to mean, well, they know everything, so they could never make mistakes. But I'll tell you, in the sutras, the Buddha recounts, or the sutras recount, a number of things that to other people you'd look at and you'd say, wow, that was a really big mistake. For example, one time, he gave a really powerful teaching on the meditation on the foulness of the body.
That's right.
And he did such a good job of teaching. They said, okay, now I'm going into retreat. And he went into retreat. While he was in retreat, a large number of monks killed themselves or had themselves killed.
That's right.
Because, now, to me, that's a mistake.
Huge mistake.
Of course, you look at the commentary on that, and the commentators, hundreds of years later, they say, well, no, you see, the Buddha was omniscient, and he can't make mistakes. And the truth is that he knew the past karma of these people, and that they had the karma to commit suicide, and that he knew that rather than intervene, the best thing was to let them go ahead and act out their karma because they had been followers of his, or because of the good karma they'd made. In their next rebirth, they were, blah, blah, blah. But if we can believe the sutras, Buddhas are not omniscient in the sense of being incapable of making mistakes. But Buddhas are omniscient, and also in terms of that kind of omniscience, if everything is empty, and everything is a projection of the mind, and if every person is living in a different reality, which is a projection of their mind, it may seem like it's really impressive to be omniscient in the sense of knowing everything in a whole self-existent universe. But imagine that you have to know everything in every projected universe in every sentient being's mind. Now that's a lot of omniscience. On the other hand, the Buddha is omniscience in understanding the way that our minds work, and understanding the true nature of reality, and understanding, this is omniscience in its truest sense. The Buddha doesn't need to know whether or not you should marry this person and tell you the advice like the village or which stock you should invest in or anything else. The Buddha does not need that kind of omniscience. The Buddha's omniscience is the omniscience that he manifested over and over again by being able to teach people effectively and lead them to enlightenment, and to leave a body of teaching that has continued to expand and grow and deepen and become richer and richer ever since. And so, and that was not a mistake. So I would think that an enlightened person could make certain kinds of mistakes.
Well, I'm interested in knowing... I'm sorry, I'm dragging this. I shouldn't ask any more questions. I know you're tired.
Do you think we could save all these?
Yeah.
Can you promise to remember them, write them down?
Yeah.
Let's bring this conversation back to life tomorrow.
Yeah.
Can we do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It'll be worth the wait. Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm enjoying it, and I think it is productive and meaningful to you. I have the feeling that I'm filling in gaps in understanding that people would like to have filled in. But it's up to you to regenerate the momentum tomorrow night so that we can continue. So,
thank you very much.
So, thank you. So, we only have 14 minutes till the bell rings.